Hello, Digesters. Your host, Kamasko Desire Mujini. We welcome you yet to another episode. Today we are having a very interesting topic, and before we can even dive into it, I have very intelligent minds today with me. So on my right is
Evans Jerry,
and on my left,
Edward Frederick Mongoy.
So we welcome you yet to another episode, another interesting episode, and I'm so sure you're going to learn a thing or two. So today we are diving into the grassroots of something that I'm so sure you're passionate about or you would want to know about, that is startups. Now, what are startups, or what comes to your mind when you talk about startups, yeah? Now we are looking at the grassroots of startups. We are looking at how valuable are startups and how are they being implemented here in Uganda. Those are some of the questions that we are going to be answering. So today we would like to ask, what are startups? And what is the root of startups in Africa, in Uganda, in East Africa generally? So
Thank you very much, Desire, for that question. Basically, when you talk about startups, we look at young companies that are coming on board with an innovative solution to solve a market gap, a market problem for a cost. That's what a startup basically is.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I also have an addition to make on that. I think we understand startups as seed companies or projects that probably have a potential to scale up. So you realize that they have transformed based on the different phases in our centuries for the past times, since 1870s, where you had the Industrial Revolution that brought up the idea of how startups were developed from the industrial side. So when you look at companies in the past, such as the Standard Oil Company, those were all startups. Then it entered into what you refer to as the Silicon Valley Age. That is the 1970s, whereby people were starting to come up with computers. Apple, Microsoft, all became up as startups. So you realize that a startup, as you said, come up with how do we solve a problem within the market. A market gap is being solved through the creation of startups that have a potential to scale up, even up to this moment where we have now the internet revolution and whatnot. I think we shall delve more on that.
Okay, thank you so much. So now that he talks about something to do with beginning up as something that can be used for development, something that can be used to maybe lead us into an industrial age that we are already in, but we look at something better. I don't know, can someone take us through, can we get to know like what is the position right now of startups in Africa? In Africa, to be specific.
Thank you very much, Desire. I would like to take us a little bit back on the history of startups in Africa specifically, and how the startup ecosystem in Africa has evolved with time. Just to paint a clear picture for us and the viewers, just imagine, a playground where we have different kids are playing, and some of these kids have those fancy shiny toys, and they are creating a lot of big things that would say is magic. And some other kids are also playing right there, but they don't really have the toys. And if these kids without any toys are given something like Lego bricks, they could use these bricks or blocks to create a lot of things, to build castles, to build cars, or even robots. And that's what basically happened with startups in Africa, specifically about mobile phones and startups in Africa.
True.
And initially, Africa skipped a very big stage that a big part of the world had to go through, because we look at most parts of the world, for them to be able to get connected and all that, they had to connect a lot of cables, a lot of wires, just from offices to houses, just to have phone networks and phone connections. And these were basically landlines. And Africa didn't experience this stage. And the reason was because, just imagine having a lot of long cables connecting villages, connecting mountains, connecting deserts in Africa. That would really be so expensive. So we didn't go in Africa, and we skipped right into the mobile phone era. And what these mobile phones were able to do is that very many people were able to get connected for the time. And these mobile phones are promote connection, and connectivity is the first thing, is the first ingredient for startups, and that's how startups have been able to evolve in Africa.
I think this is interesting.
True,
So
true.
I feel like then there is more we need to learn when it comes to startups, because I'm imagining, you see the African aspect that you have just given us. Now I'm wondering, what is the East African position? What is happening in Uganda right now when it comes to startups? What are what is the importance of you being among the people that maybe would be involved in startups? All those questions would sink into someone who would want to know about startups. Yeah.
I think the beginning foundation for startups in East Africa and Uganda at large is the collaboration that was made with the International Chamber of Commerce with the World Trade Organization. And they realize that there is potential in startups in Africa, but in particular East Africa. And a pact was created in a way that small, medium enterprise companies or small startups that may be small, medium enterprises could capitalize in the funding, and they are given a push in increasing and expanding the idea of exportation and importation, not only just multinational businesses. And so with that, NGOs have been able to enter into the market and support startups in East Africa. Of course, various competitions have been set up. You can realize that even though the youth are involved in startups, they need funding. So from the grassroots level, they are more focused in startups that deal with solving agricultural issues. It could be internet aspect, but you need to know that as they support us in funding our businesses or startups, we need to focus on Uganda as our center focus right now, because Uganda has tried its level best to create an environment that can we support these small businesses. But of course, the drawback is on the idea that is the geopolitical environment favoring these startups, okay? But short of that, we need to appreciate that there are different organizations that have tried their level best to, fund startups through competitions. And I think my colleague can raise that. So those competitions, for example, the one I'm familiar with is the JA program. The JA program is funded by Zurich Foundation. So that foundation normally does competitions for young startup entrepreneurs. Those entrepreneurs usually come up with ideas, innovations, solving basic problems, but they actually can turn out to be scalable businesses. So I think there is quite a number of efforts being made. And with that, I think JA is doing a very good job in helping startups, thrive.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That is so interesting. I think we can get, we are already getting to know at least one thing or two, and I would like him to tell us more about the collaborations, the funding. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And to pick from where my friend Jerry has stopped, talking about some of these events, some of these things that have come up to fund startups in Uganda specifically. We recently had the Startup World Cup. It's one of those big events where a startup found to come and pitch their startup ideas, and they receive funding for their big ideas. And for the first time ever, Uganda was able to host the regional Startup World Cup pitches, and over 10 startup founders were able to do pitching, and the best startup founder was selected, and they'll be heading to the global stage where they'll be pitching and receiving funding for their startup. And Jerry could tell us about the solution that they were building.
Just on that, I think we got one person who was representing us, a gentleman called, I think, Nimrod. I think he came up with an interesting idea. You see the advantage of the tech or the info technology edge. We are taking advantage of artificial intelligence and especially user-generated AI. So this gentleman called Nimrod came up with what we call an examiner AI. Now that was helping the issue of how best can you make marketing accurate. So the idea basically, if someone would want to understand, is a script that is of an examination paper, and it is scanned. When it is scanned, it gives the idea of what are the errors, what have you passed. So the issue is that is it solving a problem? And it is, because it is taking advantage of the availability of artificial intelligence. And so I think Nimrod, representing us as an emerging winner in that project, in that competition to San Francisco, right? Yeah, he will. I think he's doing a great job, and we hope he does well. Because AI is there to help us develop our ideation skills, and I think he's taking a center stage on that.
Okay, I can see we are so passionate about startups, and it is so interesting. So I would want to ask a question. I don't know who would feel free to let the viewers analyze this, but what is the face of how would you want to see startups be funded, or what projects would you want to work startups would you want to see work, or yeah, something like that. So like such that we can maybe borrow ideas for people who would be interested in knowing exactly how to go for startups, how the funding is done, all that.
Yes.
Thank you very much for that brilliant question. And to answer the question, I'd like to a little bit of background. Initially, after we had introduced in Africa, we had a number of startups out from the grassroots, and specifically talking about, for example, startups like in fintech, in edutech, in agritech, and all these startups came up solving problems, solving pain points of people in society. And later on, we got to have unicorns, and in the startup space, unicorns are basically private companies that are valued at over $1 billion. And we was able to have a number of unicorns, and many startups still grew and sprouted out of grassroots from Kenya, from Nigeria, Cape Town, which are the main startup hubs in Africa. And in Uganda right now, we also have a number of startups that have sprouted in areas like energy, because you know that the formal sector is the largest sector in the economy, especially in Uganda. And Uganda's economy relies mostly on agriculture. And so very many founders have come up to build solutions that solve pain points of farmers and the people in the rural areas who are doing large-scale and small-scale farming. Because one of the things we would acknowledge about African startups and in these different African countries is that African founders have decided to build solutions that are solving real problems. It's not about copying the playbook of, from Silicon Valley and just duplicating what they are doing, but it's about spotting a real problem that is affecting people and building a solution for this problem. And very many.
So before you can continue, there is something interesting I had you talk about. What are unicorns?
Unicorns are private companies that are valued at over $1 billion. And examples of unicorns in Africa, we have Flutter, which is based in Nigeria. We have Wave that is based in Senegal, and a number of other unicorns. They are basically private companies valued at over $1 billion US. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's actually very true. And I think to understand how startups take advantage is to understand that we need literacy of artificial intelligence. That is the foundation. Most companies, most organizations, what we call training for the employees, because we have lacked the gap. We have created a gap between the generation that is ahead of us, that has not had the opportunity to understand how artificial intelligence works. Remember, it is the use of user bots help you want to create an idea and then you try to edit it. So startup ideas are just on our fingertips, but can we then become AI literate as the beginning point? And he made a number of observations that even when you think of a startup, you need to understand the political and economic setup of your state, because when you look at these unicorns such as Flutter and also other companies such as M-Pesa that came from Kenya, remember their headquarters are not in Africa. And that is a ringing bell that they want that the investors and shareholders consider. That is the legal framework step, is the economic side stable. A developing country to have a headquarters should consider those factors. That if we are to attract and maintain startups that actually develop, then we need to then understand that the geopolitical environment is a huge factor. So that's why you find most startups in Africa or Uganda do not go beyond 5 years or 3 years. Because they are affected by the different taxation laws and the different principles. But short of that, at least we are understanding that the government has tried to come up with policies. The policy that creates an environment for startups to avoid taxes, but it has a problem that these startups have been given a market share of more than 500 million. So most startups do not have a market share. So their share capital is not yet at that level. That those that have a market share of at least 500 million as a startup will be exempted for tax for 3 years. So if the Ministry of Trade does that, and of course Uganda Revenue Authority, they are trying to consider startups, but they have that SMEs, small medium enterprises, do not have that market share yet. That is one thing they should have looked at, that the idea of a startup is not about the market share, it's the fact that it is a new idea, it has a potential of being scalable, or it has a potential of actually, trying to solve a problem. Should it be taxed? It shouldn't be taxed. At least for a certain period of time. So I think the legal framework has done us bad in considering that the market share should be 500 million, which million have that threshold.
So to our dear brilliant minds that we have today, are there any take-homes that you would like our viewers to get today?
Thank you very much. To understand the startup ecosystem very well for specifically Africa and Uganda, there's an aspect of funding that is a very key in determining the success or failure of startups in Africa. And looking at the funding of startups in the African ecosystem, looking at venture capital, which is basically having different investors come in and invest in different startups for exchange of shares in the startup or the companies. And then also we have corporate venture capital, where we have different companies investing in different startups. Companies come up and they invest in startups. And then we also have SPVs, which are special purpose vehicles. And this is like, look at it like a piggy bank, where we have investors putting money into one pool and they can invest it into one startup. And all these funding aspects have been harnessed by Africa and
challenge is that we have over reliance on foreign investment, foreign funding cost.
Challenge with this is that the moment it goes down, this leads to the failure and it increases the failure rate of startups in Africa. And I think my friend Jerry will tell us about what basically you can do better to solve all these challenges.
True. My comment would be on startup founders and those interested in becoming startup founders, because I understand that there is an illusion that probably the startups may make money, but you need to consider that these startups are just beginning, so the
quick fix. However, there's a potential in the business
has to graduate to a scale up, from a seed to a scale up. But my concern is that the funding should, or the funding coming from venture capital firms or maybe private equity firms, they need to consider that because they are startups, at least a platform should be given to them where they offer them the funds, but also the payment procedure should also be considered, probably in installments, because you're not at the level of being scalable. However, you believe that this idea might actually sprout into something useful. But all that being said, of course, we go back to the geopolitics, that the principles of taxation that need to be, amended, because recently, if they decided, as I said earlier, that recently as they decided that they need to give you a 3-year tax exemption, we need to also include that to startups, not just SMEs, because their market share is not as big as that of those that have over 500 million, which they're actually saying legally. So I think that should also be checked. So if that's done, then probably we shall be encouraged to have more startups within this AI revolution.
So I think that is what
for us startup founders.
And also
the founders, we need to hear
the solutions that solve that
our shop, not that our market condition or is way different from that of Silicon Valley.
Just copy from their playbooks and build solutions here, but we should solve real problems, real pain points, and
and we should and be able to scale up then curve to say.
It's so much I think you have for yourselves. So the task is on you to take up that job and start up something that can help you get out that situation that you're in. Otherwise, for this, you say bye-bye. Just remember to follow and like that of views.